online discussion. Please briefly introduce yourself.
Okay, I'll start off. I am Jonathan Hope. I am a partner at Fusion Systems, and I've historically been working on trading systems for Wall Street companies back in New York and here in Tokyo. I do the same. And I've been involved in Bitcoin for about 2 years, working on things such as mixing algorithms and hot wallet security.
Okay.
Thank you, Jonathan. Please make a brief introduction, Jonathan.
Okay. I'm Jonathan Underwood, and I am a technical advisor for BitBank Inc. And basically, we run a wallet. We also run a rewards app that you can get paid out in Bitcoin. We also run a Japanese language Bitcoin news channel. It's a website. And I personally have been working on wallet software in the open source community for about 2.5 to 3 years now. So that is me. So whoever wants to go next.
Yeah, I guess I can go next. My name's Jerry Chan. I'm also just a crypto enthusiast. I've been my background's kind of in Wall Street bank technology, and in recent, probably 1.5 years, I've been working on crypto projects in Tokyo. And right now I am the founder and president of Bitoku, which is a sort of crypto blockchain solution provider company in Tokyo.
Edmond, please make a brief self-introduction, please.
How you doing? I'm Edmund Edgar. I run Reality Keys. We provide data feeds for smart contracts. Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to host very talented Tokyo Bitcoiners today. We have a topic of block size. And Jerry, please make some explanation about the environment.
Yes. So I suppose the general discussion about block size limit has actually started about 2 years ago. I think it's been discussed as early as 2011 and again in 2013 because of a limitation in the block sizes that all block sizes have a hard limit of 1 megabyte, which was initially put into the blockchain code by Satoshi Nakamoto for the purposes of a protection against denial of service attacks. The idea was that when the blockchain was young and there wasn't a lot of mining power, a lot of people joining the network could join and then interfere with the network by publishing a lot of like empty blocks or very, very large but useless blocks. And so as a deterrent to this, the 1 megabyte limit was placed into the code. Now, discussions in the past, every time the people will project the growth of of Bitcoin transactions to reach a certain limit, the discussion has come up on Bitcoin forums on whether or not to increase the limit. And so I think the most recent discussions are that the limit is probably going to be hit sometime in 2016 because of just the natural growth of transactions that are happening in Bitcoin as today. So the discussion is on whether or not to increase it in a hard fork way, which is basically split the network and have a choice upping the limit to 20 megabytes. That's the the proposed, most common proposed solution, or a slew of other solutions which may involve dynamically choosing block size limits, whatever. Now, the reason why the network or people are split on this issue is because a larger block size means that it could mean more storage requirements and more bandwidth requirements for Bitcoin nodes, which currently in the system are not incentivized to participate in the network beyond altruistic reasons. Or if you're running a business like BitPay or some other payment processors, then of course you run a Bitcoin node yourself, so you run a node for your business, but it would generate more of a cost for them, where it kind of sways the political power in towards more centralized, more well-capitalized mining pools to dominate the network. And of course, the reason for keeping it, that's the reason of not increasing it. The people who argue for leaving it small also say that smaller block size will incentivize higher mining fees in order for people to prioritize their transactions on the blockchain over other ones, because if you have a limited, scarce resource such as blocks space or space in the block, a 1 megabyte block, then you're more likely to pay more to get your transaction in on it. So that's the general background of the discussion and the debate currently.
I'd like to point out that you've only really covered one side of the argument with your synopsis. You basically went and said what is bad about big blocks and what's good about small blocks, but to kind of get the other side of the coin there,
Sure.
One of the biggest problems that always gets overlooked when talking about big blocks, small blocks, and economic incentives and game theory and all that fun stuff is that there's just a technical limitation that we have on the Bitcoin network, which is, it's still a cheap resource, but it's random access memory. It's RAM. It's memory. And the reason why I say this is because if you consistently, and I'm not talking about like the stress tests that were carried out the other weeks, where obvious spam transactions that could easily be blocked if people wanted to block them only happen for like 2 hours, and then for the next couple of hours they kind of work through the backlog and kind of run through them. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what if we get more than like 10 transactions per second, like just of natural, random, normal transaction volume for an extended period of time. What if it's a week, a month, a year? What happens? Well, what will happen is the current way that at least the Bitcoin Core software is designed to handle the mempool is the mempool will increase indefinitely. Even if you had a full block, and even if you were lucky and you had like 9-minute or 7-minute blocks, if you're getting up to like 10, 11 transactions per second, you're going to always have more transactions coming into the network than you can get rid of in the blocks, as a kind of way of cleaning out the mempool. So what will happen is, most likely what will happen is a lot of people who leave their nodes running on some piece of hardware or on their cloud service, their nodes will crash and stop running, and they probably won't notice it until maybe the next day or the next week or whatever, and then maybe they'll be like, oh, well, there's so many mempool transactions, I don't know what to do. Maybe they might follow what the best recommendation is to deal with the mempool overloading. So they're like, okay, well, I could buy more RAM for my VPS, or I could buy more RAM for my hardware, or I'll just stop running a node. And so I think a lot of people saying that the big blocks are going to cause people to leave the network need to also realize that staying with the small block limit for an extended period of time to the point where natural transaction volume increases over that limit will also push people out of the network. And even if, let's say, they did come up with best practices, most of those would probably be something like Luke Jr., who, infamously sneaked a default activated patch into Gentoo Linux, their repository for Bitcoin which blacklists, Satoshi Dice, all the gambling sites, proof of existence, things like that. Anything that he deems as quote-unquote spam, or anything that people are like, well, our mempools are filling, so why don't we just start blacklisting, is one path that might be taken. So I think it's not all, green fields and roses on either side of the debate.
Can I just ask kind of the obvious question from what you were saying there, where we've got this problem that once the memory pools overflow, everything's going to crash and fall off. You were talking about, okay, once we hit this, I can't remember your wording, but you were talking about once we hit this kind of natural level. If we're going over kind of the the normal kind of full level, things are going to break. But isn't demand for Bitcoin transactions, at least if you make them cheap enough, kind of infinite, right? I mean, or if not quite infinite, it seems like the Bitcoin network, however big we scale the block size, is going to come into some kind of technical limitations at some point, right? And we have a particular guarantee that at that point, things are just gonna slow down for us. So, aren't we going to hit that mempool problem somewhere anyhow? And if we are going to hit it, isn't it kind of easier to hit it when at least we can, for example, easily add RAM to a box to get around the problem for now? Isn't it easier to hit it in that situation than hit it when we've already scaled up to kind of the limitations that that we can realistically even hit?
Well, I think the short answer to your question is yes. I mean, we're always going to face the prospect of hitting that limit, and even if we did, I do disagree that things are going to crash and burn. What's going to happen is that there's going to be an elevation of the transaction fees, so that it's basically a quality of service marketplace that occurs. So if you really wanted to get your transaction on the blockchain, you're going to pay twice the transaction fee to make that happen. But this sort of strikes at sort of the core question of what do we expect Bitcoin to be for us in the future, say 5-10 years down the road. I mean, your question assumes that, for example, there's going to be continual growth in the number of transactions. That could be because there are more people using Satoshi Dice, there are more people buying coffee with Bitcoin, right?
Or it could be more people, doing sort of non-Bitcoin stuff with it, right? More people storing,
yes, like that proof of existence and so forth, right? So, I mean, Jeff Garza, he wrote this excellent explanation of this issue, and one of the questions he posed is that what is Bitcoin? Is it supposed to be a mass adopted payment system where everyone uses it for small insignificant transactions like buying coffee and gambling, or is it supposed to be sort of a settlement system that can be used only after let's say there's a merchant or an exchange, for example, that takes dozens of trades from like currently, like Coinbase, for example. Coinbase has their private database which sort of nets the transactions before they put it onto the blockchain, right? And Coinbase uses the blockchain for basically settlement of all their activity over some period of time. And if we say yes, it's supposed to be everything to everyone, then of course we're always going to run into this issue where the number of transactions is going to exceed the block size. And so we're just sort of kicking the can down the road and not really solving the real problem, which is the fact that the blockchain in Bitcoin fundamentally really is designed, because it's solving the Byzantine generals agreement problem, is really a settlement system. It takes time, it takes energy, in order to reach consensus across the world, right? And it's not designed to be used as something like a very fast, instantaneous payment network. And if we realize that that's the case, then why should we try to continue to sort of shoehorn Bitcoin into this role of being that, when instead we could, for example, create sidechains or create a Lightning network that it's actually designed to handle very instantaneous, sort of insignificant payments, like buying coffee and so forth. That could, this type of network could facilitate mass adoption a lot easier than the blockchain can. That's one of the arguments that I hear.
Well, I think you bring up an interesting point about what is Bitcoin to people, but I can tell you one thing that it definitely is not, and that is not a trustful entity. So, and the reason why I say that is because the whole idea of Bitcoin is to be trustless. And of course, some people construe that to mean that it's not trustworthy. But what the thing that's really interesting about that is that there is a lot of trust being placed by people in the system. So what happens is even if it's just a big settlement ledger for like huge companies, or whether it's just for Joe Schmo to buy a cup of coffee, there needs to be trust that it will work as promised. So if you're a huge company and you're like, okay, this system works like this, and this is how I was promised it's going to work, and if it doesn't work like that for a small amount of time, most people only need one bad experience to kind of put them off of something for the rest of their life, unless all of a sudden it's something like the internet and everyone else is using it. So I seriously think that if we do, and I'm not saying that obviously that we're 100% going to crash into a wall, but if we do have one of these scenarios where there's a huge technical crash, to the great amounts,
1 hour.
Yeah, then what's going to happen is that neither of those use cases are going to be realized because no one's going to trust it anymore.
It just kind of didn't sound like you had a solution to that happening. I mean, we can we can raise the block size now, but it sounds like in that situation we're only one cool use case away from hitting that problem at any block size, aren't we?
Well, I mean, I agree with exactly what's being said here, because what block Bitcoin in general, or the Bitcoin core developers are suffering from, is the clarity on where they want to move Bitcoin. Like, do we want to have Bitcoin as a global Visa-like 1,000 transactions per second network? Or do we want to limit it to something that is less than that, and to move all those high-frequency transactions off into a side chain or some sort of off-chain solution? And unless we actually have the developers agree on that long-term vision of Bitcoin, we're always going to have this debate, because the solutions on either side, as as everybody said, there are pros and cons of both solutions, because the one pro for one solution is the con of the other solution. So, if we want more transactions and we want transactions to always be near free, then great, let's just make the block sizes infinity almost, right? Or as big as it needs to be, so that transactions are always free and we can always pump as many transactions as internet bandwidth will allow. On the other hand, if we want we want a more decentralized network, and decentralization and having small players in the network is more important than having a very, very large, efficient network, or that can process a lot of transactions, then maybe there should be a limit at some point where it's this is all the transactions that Bitcoin will process. If you want any more, run it off chain or run it on a side chain or something. And I don't think there's a lot of clarity in where. I mean, I think there's a good split in the developers, the core developers, on which one of them wants, one future of Bitcoin versus the other, and I think that's the problem.
So I wonder, do we actually want what would we like to see here? Would we be better to just go ahead and have a split? I mean, if we've got these people who want these kind of irreconcilable things, are we kind of better off just having this little crisis, and half the players, go off and do their own thing, whichever one wins Bitcoin takes it, and then whichever one loses goes off and makes their own thing. Is that better than sort of all trying to agree?
I personally think that this scenario that you're explaining is basically the now, I'm not one for conspiracy theories or anything, but if I were to be asked who has the most incentive to kind of get people riled up and try to push Bitcoin towards a hard fork, splitting up into two equal, coins that, is just a disaster in the cryptocurrency world, would be the kind of, signed, permissioned ledger type things, because it's like banks are already looking at Bitcoin saying, wow, that's like a big gigantic, cesspool of terrorist financing and drug laundering and all that stuff, and then here comes a guy with the new buzzword blockchain, and he's telling us that we can sign a Merkle tree on an SQL database and be like, oh, it's mutable, look at it, it's immutable, you could have done that 10 years ago, but it's immutable.
Right. Exactly.
And they're the guys who are going to win if Bitcoin fails. And I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not saying I'm against any of that. I wish them all the best, and I hope they get as many banks on their platform as possible. But I'm just saying is the idea that Bitcoin, and it was funny the other day, Luke Jr. was on Reddit, and he was saying something like, well, okay, if all of a sudden the network does crash, then we have a few weeks to actually push out a hard fork, and we can raise the block size after the fact. Right. But I just think that's ridiculous. It's like once Bitcoin is completely failed, I think we're at a point where there are other kind of options that people will go to and never come back. And I'm not saying it's the death of Bitcoin, because we know how many false predictions those have been. But I do think that it will be the biggest blow that Bitcoin has ever taken ever, if it does fail at this point.
Oh, okay. And Jonathan, you're saying you're concerned about that happening in the case that we don't increase the block size and if the network slows down to a grinding halt.
No. I'm not saying we don't increase the block size. I'm saying that if we don't come to consensus and get a working network that has, I don't want to say leadership, but has, kind of its act together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you were kind of taking it for granted. I'm just wondering if we could kind of flesh out the argument why the split would be bad for Bitcoin, right? I mean, you kind of took it for granted that this is a disaster if we ended up splitting into these two different currencies. Does somebody want to talk a little bit about if everybody thinks that's a disaster, why is it disastrous? Why is it not so good to maybe have both these things continue in the world and see if they may both be useful. It may be that only one vision is right.
Well, actually, I think both could happen, and it wouldn't be disastrous. Actually,
I think it would be. So I'm going to go on that side. It would be it would be a hit in confidence, because I think if Bitcoin split, technically it would be fine. The people who see Bitcoin as being a Visa network would stay in the increased block size of 20 megabyte camp, and maybe the people who want the other thing where we want it as decentralized as possible stay with the 1 megabyte camp or lower. But what would happen, I think, is the meta effect of having the world which is watching Bitcoin see Bitcoin split on its core values, and therefore people are really going to start looking, are probably going to evaluate more alt chains and looking whether or not if Bitcoin could split, then why not try Litecoin or Dogecoin or God help us, Monero. So I think it would be a negative. I don't know if it's going to be apocalyptic, but I do see it as kind of like it would be a negative hit towards Bitcoin confidence or confidence in the project.
I could see in the future, like for example, if there was a decision to if there's a decision to increase the block size marginally, for example, to 4 megabytes or 8 megabytes, and at the same time see technologies such as sidechains and Lightning Network move ahead, so that the concern for the concerns against the blockchain increase are mitigated, and people are free to sort of build their own sort of fast networks as sidechains and so forth outside the blockchain. I can see both of those actually happening without too much sort of division within the community, I think.
Actually, I sort of believe that that a lot of people are maybe making this as like this contentious issue that needs to be solved right now needs to be solved because of a lot of long-term reasons. Everybody's kind of looking in long-term. If we choose one way, then we're really defining the path of Bitcoin for the next 20 years kind of thing. And I think what might some people be missing is that right now, the thing that we should be most concerned about is not whether or not Bitcoin will be able to sustain 1,000 transactions per second eventually, or whether or not Bitcoin will eventually be taken over by all Chinese mining firms. I think the thing that really people should be concerned about now is we need to get Bitcoin to be adopted more. So I'm very much on the side of the proponents who argue that we should keep transactions free for as long as possible. For as long as it takes for us to get a really an actual mass marketed application use case on Bitcoin, which would solidify its dominance as the value chain. I mean, it is currently the value chain, but it really doesn't have a lot of. It doesn't actually have a really big use case, besides fringe sales in retail markets and Coinbase and et cetera, et cetera. So I believe that.
Why do you think adoption is the most critical goal?
Sorry, what do I think? Which?
Yeah. Why do you think adoption should be the salient sort of goal
I guess because if, for instance, in a scenario where let's say we don't say 20 megabytes, let's say we compromise to 8, which should be enough to. Let's say it buys us about 2 to 3 years, maybe 4 years of time, depending on transaction rates, right? Mm-hmm. If we up it to 8, then we have a larger theoretical limit, all right? Maybe it's around 100 transactions per second as opposed to 7. And with that 100 transactions per second, then we may see some of these firms like Masters, Digital DA, and Goldman, UBS. There's banks who are looking at blockchain, and they may actually be able to implement something usable for their own purpose. And once that's done, then I would be very, very certain that we may not need to increase the block size ever again, because so long as they're using it for that use case. Say NASDAQ uses it for their daily settlements. They close all their books and they publish under the blockchain. All the trades that some summary or digest of all the trades that were transacted that day. Now, once that's done, then Lightning Network would be great alternative for people who want to do Visa processing, and blockchain would have its use case, and therefore it would never be abandoned, and we wouldn't have to face some sort of hard fork apocalyptic situation where it's existential risk anymore. So that's why I think we kind of need to wait for. We kind of need to give enough room for one really good use case to be implemented in a blockchain first, I believe. So I think some sort of compromise solution is probably best between the one.
I'm kind of trying to put the small block angle here. I mean, if it turns out that use case is something that relies on having low transaction fees, and if it then turns out that, in fact, because there's some scaling limitation that that can't keep up with whatever demand we may have of it, it can't actually sustain that advantage, is that actually a good thing to be doing? To be kind of, somebody's going to build up this use case, they're going to tell the world how wonderful Bitcoin is, and then it's not going to work once everybody starts to use it because it can't handle the the traffic that we need at the cost that use case needs.
Edmund, you were breaking in and out. I think there's something wrong with your connection.
I'm sorry. Okay.
So yeah. So I think most of us couldn't catch the full question.
Okay, so am I any better now?
It sounds better.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so what I was wondering is, okay, so we find this use case. Let's say it's a use case that requires low-cost transactions. Then when it tries to scale, it turns out we've got whatever limitation we run into. It turns out we can't actually sustain low-cost transactions. Have we done a good thing there? Wouldn't we be better if the eventual limitation that we've got of expensive transactions was there from the start, and then the use case that people actually develop on it would assume expensive transactions?
Yeah, I think that's really the question at hand. I mean, let's say if we do increase the block size to 8 megabytes or 20 megabytes or so, at some point that's not going to be enough. And what we will have done by, say, by Jeff Garzek's bit 100 proposal is that we'll have implemented the mechanisms to, in the future, also increase the block size. And so we've sort of given ourselves permission to not really build that use case that you were talking about, Jerry, where everyone can actually use the blockchain for simple transactions and low-value transactions and so forth. We've given ourselves permission to sort of kick the can down the road and not actually focus on building that type of use case when we could do that now, right? When you say, Jerry, you talk about the use case that will sort of drive adoption and where people can actually use Bitcoin. When you say that, I think of the Lightning Network. I think of sidechains, something that could be less secure in terms of the cryptographic guarantees, but will provide instantaneous transactions, and it would be perfect for low value transactions. Say buying a cup of coffee, and then at the end of the day or end of the week, whatever, and then settle that transaction, netted transaction onto the blockchain, something more secure and something actually worthwhile putting on the blockchain, as opposed to, the hash value of some document that that you want to store forever on the blockchain, which is what Factom does. To me, it makes sense that we try to break off into this, as Peter called it, a hub and spoke system, where there's a Factom sidechain, and then there's a Lightning Network sidechain and so forth, where they all solve a particular problem or the particular use case that they're better suited towards, and then they use the blockchain for the security aspects of the blockchain in some sort of condensed, sort of digest manner.
Yeah, I totally agree with that kind of that perspective. Although I wouldn't call Factom and Lightning Network a side chain as yet, because they're actually not pegged to Bitcoin. But if,
right.
in the situation where they are,
I'm presuming. Yeah, I'm not thinking sort of to use another like.
Yeah.
I think of those as potential side chains.
Then I think that's fine. I think if that was the case, then, and if everything were to go into side chains, then I personally still think we need bigger than 1 megabyte blocks, because 7 transactions a second is just ridiculous. But something more like
I can agree with that.
10, even maybe 20, but then we would just set it 20 forever, or even like 8 is fine.
Well, I don't really think that the debate centers around the actual limit itself. I think it's basically the way in which we are going to, and the timing in which we are going to, if we ever do, raise the block limit. And also, then because a lot of people want to push it, as we need to raise the limit right now, a lot of people are then using that as kind of a opportunity to kind of pull up the question of what do we want the Bitcoin blockchain to be.
Yeah,
so I agree with you that it will increase, the block limit will increase eventually, whether or not we get side chains, whether or not we get Lightning Network. Just because 7 transactions per second is not enough to settle, like, even the top 1% of businesses in the world, or in, let's just say, top like 10 countries, would still need more than 7 transactions per second to settle whatever Lightning Networks or whatever it is that they're running.
Yeah, that very well could be the case, Jonathan. But I haven't seen any sort of simulations that tell us whether 1 megabyte or 4 megabytes or 8 megabytes should be enough for this number, this amount of activity on the Lightning Network, or and so forth, because those structures haven't been built yet, so we don't really have the framework to simulate those just yet.
So actually, let's change it, steer the discussion towards then the two camps of how we change the block size. Bit 100, bit 101, Garzik's dynamic blockchain block size limit voted in by miners, like a majority democracy. I don't know. We can go over the details one at a time, but you have basically a dynamic system, and you have a fixed system that goes up in some sort of inverse exponential way, which is the Gavin model. What are your guys' thoughts on the pros and cons of those two models of increasing block size?
So Gavin made the argument that we should expect that network capacities and disk capacities will increase over the next 5 to 10 years, so that we can reliably plan for that in the future, and therefore it's okay for us to sort of, as proposed in those BIPs, that there's going to be a dynamically increasing block size. That flies directly in the face of Peter Todd's concern, and I see that Jimmy had a question here about that. If you guys don't mind, I'd like to sort of talk through one of the interesting criticisms Peter had against increasing the block size in general, and then also, of course, obviously for dynamically increasing the block size going forward. So Peter's concern is, and I suspect that most of the core developers who are against the increase are also concerned about this, is that increasing the block size not only makes it difficult for some people to participate in the blocks, in the full node validation, but it also incentivizes miners to join the larger mining pools so that they can sort of better guarantee that their chances of getting a block reward. And that naturally will cause a centralization of the mining effort and the validations of the nodes. Because currently we have some 6,000 nodes. That's probably going to decrease if we have the block size increasing dynamically, or if the block size is substantially increased to 20 megabytes. The issue there is that with all of the regulatory desire, the desire, especially within the United States, of the regulators to regulate the Bitcoin network in and of itself. For example, some people think that Bitcoin mixing, for example, is anti-money laundering. Is money laundering. Therefore, we should regulate that. If someone finds a tainted coin, they will probably put a lot of pressure on some of the more popular mining pools to block those types of transactions. And Peter Todd's position on this is that we should, at all costs, try to keep Bitcoin resistant to censorship or regulation of any kind whatsoever. And so, in general, we should keep, that's part of the argument of why we should keep the block size consistent. So, Jimmy, I think that should answer your question on that. And then back to Jerry's point, your question is, what do we think about either the dynamic increase of the block size or any other such increase? I think if we do increase the block size, I think it should be, if possible, it should be just a one-time increase to 4 megabytes or 8 megabytes at the moment. Even if the network capacities double, say, in the next 10 years, and our disk capacities quadruple in that amount of time, I think it's a good thing that we keep the cost of full node validation constant and relatively small, assuming that we have other solutions like sidechains and Lightning Network and so forth. So I tend to frown upon what Jeff's proposed in terms of like a dynamic changing block size as we go forward.
Can I just follow up a little bit on Peter Todd suggesting? Because I do think that this is the most serious argument here. I mean, you can argue that it's nice for people to be able to to participate as full nodes, but it's not obvious that there's a huge kind of security benefit there. But once it comes to mining, that's where we've actually got a security issue. Can everybody hear me? Have you lost me?
Yeah, we can hear you clear.
Okay. So I guess there are two issues coming out of what you just said. One is the security argument real, right? Is there really, for example, in the kind of block sizes that Gavin is proposing, is it really going to make a difference to mining centralization? So we've got this situation where, for example, there are really 3 big pools in China. And between them, they make 51%, and I think we all agree that that's a very serious problem. Is this really going to make it worse, or is it not? So I think that's the absolute core of this debate, and that's the most important thing that kind of eclipses everything else. But then the other side of this that we have to look at is what is the right way to make Bitcoin actually censorship-proof. And I think that there's an argument that the best way to do it is just to get a lot of legitimate use cases on the chain using Bitcoin very soon, and to grow it up very quickly, so that people who want to regulate it in ways that potentially make it more painful and difficult to use are going to see more political opposition. So I find that it seems to me that for that reason, I think that's a kind of a very powerful push, that if we can get a lot of use of the thing, it's going to be much harder to ban and to monkey around with. So we need a very strong argument for mining centralization to outweigh that argument for just more use cases faster.
But it depends on who, when you bring it to mass adoption, who are those users who you're bringing on to use the blockchain. If we're bringing on lots of just general public people who are living in the USA, for example, middle class people, and you bring them on board onto the blockchain for simple payments and watching, paying for movies and so forth, paying for dinner and so forth. That's going to have a different political bent, say, than if you were bringing on, 1 million people in China, right? And same for if you run under, as they call them, underbanked countries. For example, if the mass adoption proposition was heavily for middle class Americans, I think we would see a lot of anti-money laundering regulations being just passed and implemented, and people, most of that population would be okay with it. So I don't think it's as simple as just bringing on more people and
I don't know. I'm not sure that they would. When you look at it in practice, what's got to be done to, So for example, the classic example we were talking about was mixers, tumblers, where which is something that you do for privacy. Now, you may not want to use those if you're using the normal banking system because you already have a certain amount of privacy.
Right, exactly.
But in Bitcoin, you don't have that kind of privacy. So if you're any business that's using Bitcoin, you're going to want to use a tumbler. So or at least anyone who's doing it seriously. So if you try to monkey with those things and there's a lot of adoption, then you will have some political pushback. If you try to monkey with them when it's kind of a niche thing used by hackers and people buying drugs and these kind of this fairly small interest group that we've got right now, then there's going to be very little political pushback.
I'd like to go back to Edmund, your point, which was a very salient one. So I guess what we have here is, I think, general agreement that maybe a one-time increase of block size up to maybe 8 megabytes or something bigger than now, so that we give ourselves enough time for solutions like Lightning Network to actually become developed, because I don't believe that it's ready to go in any sense of the word right now, nor our sidechains.
Yeah, certainly not.
So we want to give ourselves enough time for those solutions to develop, in which case we won't need to change the block limit again later. So maybe a one-time static change as opposed to a dynamic one, or a dynamic one which is democratically voted in by the miners. But sorry, long-winded lead up. What Edmund, you said was, would a change to 820 megabytes affect us today? And therefore that's the important thing we should be wary of. And my opinion there is, It may, because if the miners were, well, okay, if the miners were acting in their own self-interests, then it won't, because I do believe that the Chinese miners or whoever can constitute 51% are doing this because the block reward is significant. So it probably would be okay, but once the block reward becomes not so significant, then it may become not profitable, but it would become possible or plausible for mining pools to just deliberately fill up a 20 megabyte block with not fictitious but spurious transactions just to edge out their competitors. I don't know. I kind of see that might be possible.
Yeah, I've heard that argument before, that the value, the block reward will decrease if we increase the block size to 20 megabytes. I don't quite understand why that would be the case.
Anybody else have that?
I think the transaction fees would be the same. Like if today we increase the block limit to 20 megabytes, I think it would be the same as it was before.
Oh, yeah, no, I absolutely agree. The transaction fees would be the same. I'm speaking more on the say we increase to 20 megabytes, and a very large pool said, I just want to take out my competitor, and I'm going to risk potentially destabilizing confidence in Bitcoin in general. So it sounds a little crazy now because they're making 25 Bitcoins per block, so why would they want to jeopardize the value of those Bitcoins? But when the block reward itself, like the actual Coinbase reward, were to shrink.
I see.
Why does it matter? Why does it make a difference whether the coin reward shrinks to whether? I mean, don't you? Either way, isn't the incentive to maximize, or at least the kind of the broad long game incentive is to maximize the value of the whole ecosystem, right? But counteracting that, we think that there may be a kind of a sort of a short-term narrow incentive to try to kill off your competitors and to expand your own share. Don't those things both act in the same way, whether they're getting money from the block reward or from the transaction fee?
Well, I kind of so say the block reward was, or the Coinbase was, I don't know, negligible. So say it was maybe not even 12, maybe like 7 Bitcoins or whatever like that, and Bitcoin price were to appreciate the point where or stay low, and 7 Bitcoins is not that much money. Then, if I was a large mining pool, I might actually think of choking out my competitors by creating 20 megabyte blocks, even if it meant that 19 megabytes of that block are transactions paying myself, just so that I fill them up so much that it blows out their storage requirements or their bandwidth capabilities. And I wouldn't be blamed for it because I'm doing something completely legal, and nobody would know that 19 megabytes of these transactions are actually my own, not actually real transactions, right?
Yeah. Okay. So that's an argument against kind of infinite block sizes, and abolishing the cap, which has been something that people have discussed, right? But do people? Well, okay. So here's my question: Do people think that if you go to 20 megabyte blocks in the current environment, right, with current computer costs and current connectivity, you already need quite a lot of money and hardware to actually mine in the first place, right? So are these big blocks going to actually blow any competitors? I mean, is this actually a realistic attack?
I believe so. Because it's not so much that you would blow out their space requirements, it's more the fact that if you had 20 megabyte blocks flying around, then there would be significant delays in block propagation. And whenever you have delays in block propagation, then your connectivity to the payment processors or the real people sending transactions, your internet connection in terms of milliseconds of them would give you a significant advantage because you're receiving 20 megabytes faster than your competitor who may be receiving 20 megabytes slower, so you can mine faster than them.
Well, you're only sending out your own block, right? So you're delaying the propagation of your own block, but you're not controlling what blocks other people are creating.
Well, no, you wouldn't. Okay, so you wouldn't delay your own propagation because you're creating 19 megabytes of spurious transactions, which is instantaneous. So what would happen
Yeah,
is
yeah,
that
But that would make it take longer to get across the network and give you a higher rate of orphaning.
that's true.
But that's not the attack vector. What you're thinking of is the validation time. The idea is that if you make a huge block that takes a really, really long time to validate, any pool operator needs to validate everything within the block before it starts sending out the block header as a template to all of the miners. Up until then, all of the miners in that pool are mining a previous block. So the idea is that you get as many ECDSA signatures in there per byte volume, and you just cram it in there so that like 90, like however much you can optimize it so that you get the most ECDSA signatures into a huge ass block, and then you just send it around, and then while they're verifying that block, they're not mining anything worthwhile. They're just sitting there verifying while you're basically already working on the next block because you've already verified it because you're the one who made it.
So couldn't you get the same effect by just sitting on your block for longer and not sending it out, which is the classic selfish mining thing? Because you can do that without needing network propagation.
That wouldn't affect your competitors because it wouldn't force them to do validation, I guess.
So the idea is that the competitor sees that you have a new block, and so they want to build on top of that block, but the other, like the pool people who are like participating in the pool, during the time when they are validating a new block that they've seen, is the only time where mining is pretty much like sitting with their thumbs, in different places. So basically, the longer you can make pool operators spend validating, the more time you can waste for them.
I'm just not seeing how it's useful to waste that particular time. I mean, presumably during that time they're still chuntering away on the previous block, mining their own block, right?
Yeah.
So and presumably if they mine their own block at that point before they validate it, I don't know if the current software would use their own block or not, but they'd certainly be incentivized to use their own block, right? So I'm just seeing kind of how this differs in practice from the classic selfish mining thing of sitting on your own block for longer. And it actually sounds to me like the classic selfish mining thing of sitting on your own block for longer is better, because you have the option of blasting it out really fast if you need to, right? So with selfish mining, the idea is that you mine a block, and then instead of broadcasting it straight away, you just hold on and start mining the next one on top. And then if you see that somebody else mines a block, then you send it out, and you have maybe a 50-50 chance of winning. And if they don't, then if you're lucky, you get the next block as well. So that was kind of the classic selfish mining thing. Now it sounds to me, maybe I'm kind of being slow, but it sounds to me like you're doing the same thing here in practice. You've sent the block, but people are taking time to validate it instead. Except that you no longer have this control where you can blast your thing out really quick because you've already sent this block out with that's going to be slow to validate, and the slowness to validate is outside your control.
Yeah, the idea is that the slowness to validate is being held by everyone else except for you. So in other words, to give a kind of like visualization of what's happening is when you're selfish mining, no one knows what you're doing, and they're just sitting there mining on their own, and they're actually doing work that's valuable. They're actually hashing towards a block that if they found it, and sure, you could throw out your block as soon as you saw their block. But they are doing work that could possibly get them, bitcoins. But the problem is that when you've sent out your block and they start validating it, like if they're like 5 seconds into validating your block and they find a block, are they going to say, okay, I got this guy's block 5 seconds ago, so I know for a fact, unless there was some other orphan somewhere else, because I know for a fact I haven't found a block since I saw this one. So I have a pretty good idea that this block is everywhere else. So even if I found this block that is based off of the same block as the one I've been validating for the past 5 seconds, no one's going to accept it because, and I'm sure you could try if you wanted to, but if you start trying it and you're just like, well, we found a block on the last one, but it looks like this huge-ass one that I've been validating for the past 10 seconds, is pretty much everywhere, and I can't send my block anywhere. So I'm just sitting here validating this.
Well, you know that everybody else has also got this slow to validate block, right? So I don't know if.
But if they already have a slow to validate block that they are validating right now, they're not going to be like, okay, everyone on the network, let's decide to throw away this really huge block and just accept this, other guy's block. That's not how it works.
I think, Edmund, what John is saying is that what you said, one of the premises you mentioned, like when you see this big block, what are you doing? Are you continuing to mine your own? The thing is, people wouldn't be. They wouldn't be, because when you see a block header, you know it's valid. So the validation is just something you just need to do to remove the transactions from your UXO pool that you need to remove for the next block that you need to mine. It is never going to be the case that the validation will fail and all of a sudden the block is invalid, right? Because a block header is a valid block no matter what.
So what if you actually
the reason why you need to validate all of the transactions is because you can't build on this block until you know exactly which transactions are in the block, so that you don't accidentally take the same transaction and put it in two separate blocks, which would be an invalid block.
Exactly.
Right. So you could just start mining an empty one for now.
That's what a lot of people
just lose 5 seconds of fees, right?
Yeah, that's what a lot of people do. That's why sometimes you see Coinbase only blocks on the network. And it's usually after a bigger block. So that even happens right now with a 1 megabyte block. And it's not that it's a function of the actual block size limit itself. I think once other technologies like inverse Bloom filters, things like that, start making mining propagation a lot easier, it might solve some of these problems. But these are problems we're already hitting right now, and I honestly don't think that they're going to be exacerbated by increasing the block size. They're problems that we've had at pretty consistent rates since we've been a small little fledgling network.
So it sounds like. Go ahead, John.
Well, I was going to ask everyone what. This is sort of like the $64,000 question. If you were chief scientist of Bitcoin, what would you recommend the community do? Increase the block size? If so, how much? And why?
I guess I'll go first. Sorry, Jonathan, you want to go first?
Sure, why not? I would recommend that the network block size limit would be raised based on transaction volume, and I would probably come up with some like really super awesome way of calculating that, I'm sure. But no, I'm just joking. But yeah, I would try to figure out some way, assuming that I'm the chief scientist, I would probably be a lot smarter than I am right now, to kind of scale up Bitcoin relatively. So I guess kind of like what Garzik has proposed, kind of like a variable block size limit that would basically, move in conjunction with the network demand on block size.
I'll go next. Yeah, I'm for Garzik's dynamic moving block size as well, with the exception that the only one thing I do see a problem with is it's kind of complex. Unfortunately, complex solutions have a way of being gamed all the time, because when you have a set of rules, you always have people who will find ways to manipulate them. So while Gavin's increase every 2 years kind of scale sounds on a simplistic level much, I guess, simpler and maybe even safer, I do believe the important thing of Garzik's proposition is that he wants to avoid a hard fork to make a change in the future. So while I don't necessarily agree with his solution of maybe the formula where people will vote and you have like a 2-week or 2-month window when you can change it. That level of complexity is a little bit scary, but I do believe it should be dynamic, and I do believe that minors or people should have to vote on what it should be. But the most important thing is, I think dynamic changes in the future should be a soft fork, and any change that makes it a soft fork in the future is, I think, the way we have to go.
Okay, shall I go? Are we doing kind of if I was Gavin in this actual situation, or are we doing if I was dictator of Bitcoin? Because if I was Gavin in this actual situation, I would do the simplest thing that we possibly could do, that was hardest to FUD. Because the problem is that this suggestion, whatever it is going to attract all kinds of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So if I was him, I'd do what he's doing, which is a simple thing that just keeps rising. However, if I was dictator of Bitcoin, I think it would be more like Jeff Garzik's thing, which I think the only thing I differ with Jeff Garzik would be that I would use a kind of a smaller majority. So he has this very big supermajority who have to vote to change the block size, and I suspect it would be better with something that was closer to a simple majority.
Yeah, I think I would increase it, but I would probably be much less aggressive than Mike Kern and Kevin have been with it. I would probably schedule it.
Sorry, can't hear you, Jonathan.
I would recommend an increase, probably to 4 to 8 megabytes. I'm not sure if I would do the dynamic increase myself. And also, I would schedule the block size increase to be less aggressive in terms of the timetable than what Mike Kern and Gavin are pushing right now.
Okay.
So I guess, does anyone want to talk about Blockstream, sidechain, Lightning networks, Chinese miner influential, permission ledgers influential for the last 2 minutes?
I wouldn't mind. Sorry to suddenly jump in. I wouldn't mind actually just a little bit of a summary of what permission ledger is. I don't happen to know very much about it myself, so someone can maybe just give a quick summary.
Yeah. I don't mind. Well, I'll do a quick one. Permission ledger, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's what I've been calling distributed ledger, which is basically a blockchain without Bitcoin, or without a value token at all. Ripple is your best one. I mean, it has its own value token, but it's arguable that it has any value. Not monetary, not real monetary value anyway. And when I say real, I'm obviously subjective use of the word real. But Hyperledger is another one. Eris is another one, and so there are some folks working on blockchain as a cryptographically secured linked list database with multiple trusted parties as quote-unquote miners or forgers or verifiers. And basically the reason why you don't need a value token is because you can trust the miners. And why can you trust the miners? Because it's permissioned. It's like a walled fence garden that you're only allowed in if you're part of the old boys club.
Yeah.
And how does the implementation of this work? Does this act on the current blockchain, or is it sort of a more sidechainish technology, or?
It's basically its own thing. It's not related to the Bitcoin blockchain at all. I believe services like Factum and other ones are going to insert hashes of their block, Merkle something or other. They're going to take some sort of hash that basically just kind of sets in stone everything up until that point into a single Bitcoin transaction once every month or something like that. Mm-hmm. I think that's just trying to bootstrap it. But yeah, basically it's just no value token, basically blockchain without Bitcoin. whether or not that has any value. A lot of people are trying to sell it as having value for, banks and institutions, and they can use it to revoke permission to something or other, and I don't know. I don't really understand the use case, but yeah, basically it's just Bitcoin without Bitcoin.
Blockchain without Bitcoin.
Right.
Blockchain without Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
I think this was the technology that Blythe Masters was trying to introduce in that, I think it was called Exponential Finance Conference. And she did a really good job of explaining what she envisages that being. And it sounds like what she's aiming for is something that would revolutionize the way banks are doing capital market transactions. This can be the buying and selling of securities, interest rate swaps, and other sort of corporate financing transactions. And they can do this effectively. I mean, if I were to boil it down to one sentence, it's basically very smart use of cryptography in a controlled and permission environment, authoritative environment, for more efficient, cost-effective, and more secure securities processing, basically.
Yeah, I also have been highly debating this with some Bitcoiners and some other crypto folks the last couple of weeks. I do see that there is a value proposition potentially here.
I do too.
Yeah, because I don't. A lot of Bitcoin purists will say, if you don't have Bitcoin with the blockchain, then you don't have immutability, you don't have trust. And that to a certain extent is true. You don't have a trustless network, but that's what the permission part is about. And whether it's immutable. Sorry, Jonathan, you want to say something?
Oh, no. I was just going to say, yeah, because banks already have a trust system built up. They don't need mining.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a large part why banks are much more interested in Ripple than they were in Bitcoin. But Ripple still has a value token. They just sort of de-emphasized it to a large extent, and are probably holding it in their coffers to give out to banks who implement with them. But the value proposition is exactly the fact that you want it permissioned so that you can keep this information out of public hands, because banks won't want anybody to be able to see what they're publishing to each other on their shared sort of database. So yeah, I think there is a potential. The issue is still up in the air, though. It still has yet to be seen whether or not a closed environment will have bad actors cropping up. So if you're a group of 5 banks and one guy comes in and he slams the network with a lot of mining power, what do you do? So yeah, it's something to watch.
Yeah, but I think with permission ledgers, mining may not be a part of the equation. Actually, I think it's effectively, if you think about it, all banks would really be, because banks know who they are. There's an identity component there, whereas Bitcoin has this pseudonymity aspect to it. But in the banking world, you know exactly who your counterparty is. You know who their counterparties are. The real question is this transaction that I've entered into, can we prove this to a settlement layer that this is the actual transaction that we've entered into, and do so in a way that's irrefutable? Right? Well, you can't do that with digital signatures and other public key cryptographic techniques. Essentially, I think digital, this permission ledgers can be simply the effective use of digital signatures and messaging mechanisms, so that you can actually guarantee that you have fully documented that there was a transaction that took place. And then it's just a shared database. So you don't necessarily need to have mining in this particular scenario. But I think the cryptography part is going to be very important. And so it's a slightly different problem than what's being solved by Bitcoin.
So should we move on to the last? Oh wait, that was the last one. Okay. Does that answer your question, Aya?
Yes, yeah, no, it does. Although I just kind of wanted to make, I mean, it's a little bit of a step back, but it seems like no matter what any of the solutions are about block size, just to like, sorry, quite a rewind, but it's whether it's Lightning Network or a mining issue, blah blah blah. It really ends up coming down to I mean, everyone says use case, but the use case is the users. So even though miners or developers may have a say in what happens, I just kind of wonder how much these solutions are going to be a burden for actual Bitcoin users to adopt, to be like, will it make mainstream adoption a little bit harder? For example, in the case of Lightning Network, merchants may have to learn how to use a second technology, which is already kind of Bitcoin is scary enough. So I kind of just worry about less what the developers are thinking and what happens with the miners, but more so how this is going to affect the real end user.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't think that we should take the success of these systems for granted. I mean, they're very cool systems and they have a lot of potential, but there are a lot of cool systems in the world with a lot of potential that never actually really get a lot of adoption. Mm-hmm. And I do think, like, I don't want to kind of sound like I'm sort of worshipping Satoshi here, but I do think that Satoshi had kind of a rare gift that Steve Jobs has as well for saying these are the things that need to be simple to get something adopted, and these are the problems that don't really matter. And I think Satoshi got that. I'm not certain that the people who are proposing these other systems have exactly that same gift. And I get a little bit nervous when people go away from Satoshi's sort of vision that, at least till now has kind of worked pretty well, and try and suggest these things that are kind of complex in different places and have trust in different places, and they may not be the right places. So I think we should pursue these things, but I don't think we should assume that automatically that they will succeed in the way that on-chain Bitcoin succeeds.
Exactly. That is exactly what I think about Lightning networks, and well, I think sidechains are a pretty interesting technological advancement, but that's just kind of like a cup to pour water in. So I mean, you could put some apple juice in there, or you could fill it with sewage. You never know what's going to happen, but it looks like it's going to be an interesting development. But Lightning networks, yeah, that's going to increase the censorability of Bitcoin transactions by a whole lot. I can guarantee.
Yeah, that's kind of. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Jonathan. My concern, I'm like, for example, when I read the Lightning network paper, it doesn't have that. Just like what I think Edmund was saying, it doesn't have the clarity of vision that Satoshi's network, paper has. And so I'm very concerned when I read this paper whether this has actually been very thoroughly thought out. So I'm not putting too much trust into it, but I think this direction, this sort of approach, is something that we need to seriously look at going forward.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, the great thing about Bitcoin is that, I mean, it's really an electoral currency, and it's something that we are able to choose to use. It's I don't know, I guess Andreas put it as like the democratization of currency creation. In that case, it kind of makes me feel like Lightning Network and sidechains is kind of a fix for a problem, whereas we could be just making alternate currencies. I think there's kind of room for multiple, cryptocurrency environments or ecosystems. There's no reason why we can't just have multiple altcoins and whatnot, as opposed to using sidechains of Lightning Network to fix problems that we could be just kind of redoing from scratch.
I kind of have to. I think that's one of the points I feel quite strongly about. I do not generally believe in alt chains. because I believe a lot of them mean well, especially the ones which have specific app use. So I'm not talking about app coins or ones which have a specific use like Namecoin. I'm talking about ones which are trying to experiment with different sort of economic models compared to blockchain or the blockchain. And those ones will, I believe, will fail because they will always be struggling with the bootstrapping of their token value while at the same time trying to experiment with their new sort of economic model. And while I don't believe sidechains will be, the be-all and end-all for everything, I do believe that it's most useful in being able to experiment with Bitcoin modifications on the core chain without actually having to deal with the bootstrapping of the value token problem. So it allows for coins to move from Bitcoin, which is worth money, and go into the side chain, play around with it, see how the model works, and then people can exit, and no harm done, no harm, no foul kind of thing. You can earn interest in a side chain, maybe. You can earn, there's an inflation in side chain. So it really is the economic solution for alternative chains. And I believe if any sort of other alt chain tries to come up with an alternative economic solution that doesn't do it on side chains, they are shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you about using a sidechain as sort of like an experimental field for actual Bitcoin network, but I do think really that there is kind of a space for niche uses. I mean, like we'll even mention like the Namecoin. I think that's actually a very good example of just like a very specific solution that's designed for one particular task. And no matter how this block size thing pans out, there's always going to be like some group who's kind of felt like Bitcoin is no longer sort of the cool thing that they were hoping for, and that they find certain features are missing. So I don't know. I just think that there's probably room for niche use of other altcoins out there. Not that they're going to like take over. I think Bitcoin has a significant network effect advantage that it won't really be taken over, but there is sort of that niche space that's ready to be filled by someone.
I mean, we could blow that network effect away, right? If we tried to price our users off the blockchain, make them go away to something else,
right?
They will, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, there's space for niche uses. So that's totally fine. But where you have to tread sort of carefully is that a lot of alt chains are in it just to sort of get rich themselves.
Right. Well, that's kind of a to be expected occurrence. I think those never last long, and unfortunately, some people do kind of get caught up in them and they get burnt down. But I don't know. I still think that the nice part about this technology is that it gives us the choice to choose alternatives whenever we need to.
So I guess the only other thing we haven't touched upon is Chinese miner influence. How does everybody feel about the influence of Chinese miners? Too much?
Everything else I use in my life is probably made in China anyway, so.
They've got the hash rate. They get to make the decisions. I mean, that's how it works.
Yeah, I think that's. I agree with Edmund. That's kind of just how it was designed to be. Just everyone's able to mine, and China has more people than anyone else in the world, so it's kind of just ineffective.
Well, also the fact that they have the cheapest electricity in the world. And basically, mining is just a constant, race for the cheapest. I think like the biggest mining operations in America are in some city that like subsidizes you down to like, what was it, like 1 cent per kilowatt hour or something like that. And so like there's no mining at all in like all of America except for like this one town.
Yeah. But I mean, This mining is very dynamic, though, right?
Yeah, it changes all the time.
Right now it's China, but it wasn't very long ago we were worrying about gigahash, right? Where were gigahash? You know, was there mining stuff in the Ukraine, I think, or they were based in London? I'm not sure, but anyway, you know, it seems like, you know, every 6 months to a year the people we worried about disappear to almost nothing. So I think that right now, you know, China's doing well, but you never know how long that's going to last. On the other hand, I do think that the fact that basically censoring Bitcoin could consist of pretty much 3 phone calls is very worrying. You know, and like I said, you know, 3 phone calls to 3 biggest pools, and you've got 51%, right?
Right.
If you're the Chinese police. So I do think that with the whole block size debate, it's almost the only thing I care about is what does it do to miner centralization? Never mind the nodes and all the other stuff. What does it do to miner centralization? And that's an answer that you have to answer with numbers. You know, we've got this attack involving validation, so how much difference does it make?
You know? Yeah, I agree as well. And there's, you know, mining is always going to be dynamic. It's going to be a race to zero, who has the cheapest electricity. I think that's part of the design, which is great. You know, proof of stake folks will basically roll over in their grave when they say like that's the whole problem with Bitcoin. Well, but that's the whole economic system. So it may be whoever develops fusion energy next. All right, then all of a sudden all mining will be done from Stark Towers in New Manhattan. So who knows?
I really wish we had established or created a sidechain or altcoin or version 2 of Bitcoin that had a different proof of work system, so that we wouldn't be speaking of mining purely in terms of electricity and how many gigahashes you can get. And I think that is one of the issues that we really are facing when we're talking about mining. It all boils down to how much electricity, how cheap you can make your electricity. I think Jerry, you and I were discussing alternate proof of work systems, and I think there's a lot of space there to have been explored. And unfortunately, I think Bitcoin's success in mass adoption has sort of jumped ahead of its development in terms of protection against these sorts of centralization inducing types of dynamics, such as the hashing proof of work.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's sidechains is really cool because it, for the first time, allows that possibility. It would be if, say, the world decided that they didn't want SHA-256 mining and they wanted some sort of something that required more memory as opposed to more CPU power, where it wasn't CPU bound. And if we had a sidechain of Bitcoin or a sidechain attached to Bitcoin and allowed people to hop over, if more than 51% of the people hop over and start using that, then I mean, I can't think of a better way to migrate from one to the other. It would be completely smooth because everybody's value would be preserved.
Yeah, and I think that's the real value of sidechains. So it allows us to experiment with that. Also, sidechains could be the mechanism by which we, traverse sort of hard forks in a more controlled manner. That's probably the last I'll say about sidechains. I think we're running out of time, actually. We've been on for about an hour and a half now, so we probably want to wrap up pretty soon.
Yeah. Homasan, you have anything else before we wrap up? Homasan?
Maybe he says, sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you very much for very productive discussion today. I'm very impressed at whole overview of your understanding. My last question is, if you like to talk about Greece, I'd like to hear your opinion around this current huge issue.
Well, it's pretty simple. If if your capital can be controlled, it's not your capital, and it's basically that's the story of Greece.
Yeah, I'd say the story of Greece is if you have money in the bank and you haven't got it already, you're screwed. This is how banks, and this is how fractional banking collapses, in step-by-step fashion. I just hope we don't have any people who got caught in this, but it's going to be something to watch in the next couple of days leading up to the 5th.
Greece could see this happening. I mean, they could see this happening from a mile away, right? This hasn't been in the development for the last year and a half, maybe even 2 years.
It's true. It's true, but every time it's happened at least like 3 times in my recent memory. Every time it's happened, they've always kicked the can down, and they at the last minute something the ECB comes in and saves them. So I think a lot of people were expecting the same thing to happen because I mean in this game of chicken, the Greek government has always backed down at the last minute, but this time they didn't, and they just said screw you, we're just gonna basically leave it up to our citizens to decide. And so really, I don't know what the referendum will come to. I'm not going to call that, but I do think that the ECB is in a much tougher bargaining position than it was, 4 years ago, or was it in January? So.
Yeah, I mean, the tragedy of it is that the smart money's gone, right? The people who kind of who've got a lot of money have moved it, right? And it's the it's the old ladies who are going to get screwed who have still got their money in the bank.
Exactly.
It's also the young couple with a new child, and they're trying to save up for their child's future, and they don't know the first thing about trading and overseas accounts, and they're just working a 9 to 5, and then all of a sudden they wake up the next day and their savings for their son's college is worth nothing. And I think it's tragic, and I pray for everyone that lives in and holds the drachma. Yeah.
Smart people bought a lot of Bitcoin and took off.
Yeah.
Or just a German bank account, right?
I don't like the. I don't like. I get the idea that Bitcoin is great, and I personally think that it's an amazing tool for basically, avoiding situations like this on a personal level. I mean, obviously, if everyone in Greece went onto Bitcoin, I'm sure they would have other problems.
To put it mildly.
Like they would all of a sudden have a problem called 1 megabyte to worry about, which is another thing. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people say on Reddit, it's like, they should have adopted Bitcoin. They should have done that and the other thing. And I'm like, Bitcoin does not have the we do not have the infrastructure to support them. And to suggest that they, as a complete country, should move onto the blockchain is more irresponsible than the amount of debt that their country has gotten. I also think that the kind of jubilee that a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, this is going to cause people to buy Bitcoin and get the price to go up. I really don't agree with that. I think Bitcoin is a tool that some people who are smart enough, which is kind of like the next level below smart money, the people who don't have the overseas bank accounts with Forex exchanges and all that stuff, can kind of use it to get out right after on the tails of the smart money. And then the other people will be, victims. And, it's a very sad situation that it had to come to that.
Are you describing Greece or are you describing Japan?
5 years later, right?
5 years later.
Have we got 5 years?
Japan, about to default on all debt. Yeah, well, Japan is still living in the bubble,
But I mean, what we could say, positively, what Bitcoin could be doing for people in Greece now is, if you're trying to make a payment with somebody and you can't make that payment in cash, or if you want to take a payment from outside Greece, you probably don't want them to wire your money into your Greek bank account.
Oh,
So in that situation, you know, those are the people who Bitcoin can help right now, even if you couldn't get your money out of the bank into Bitcoin as a safe haven, which maybe it isn't ideal for anyway. But if you actually want to transact now and your banking system is broken, you know, it's not going to be for everybody, but there probably are some people who Bitcoin could help.
Completely unrelated to Greece, completely unrelated at all. But in my home country of the United States, finally at the federal level, equality for marriage rights just got passed, and I think that is an amazing use case for Bitcoin, because if there's anyone that needs Bitcoin to buy cakes and wedding dresses and stuff, then it is you know, anyone who wants to get married now. So that's a really awesome thing.
Wow,
And
I did not know that.
I just thought I'd bring that up because you know, it's pretty cool. My news feed on Facebook is just filled with people who got their profile pictures covered with the rainbows and stuff like that. So proud of that.
I was wondering why there were rainbows before.
It's like there's a lot of rainbows on my Facebook feed recently. I wonder why.
Okay, so should we wrap it up? Homo-san, anything else? Anybody?
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to listen to your profound opinions. So I really appreciate the debate tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Roasting.
So I'm going to stop broadcasting.
Okay.